Hello everyone, Brother Al McClaney with this week's stewardship video. And as always, before we go too far, let's read the disclaimer. No advice should be seen as a recommendation or endorsement, as I am not a licensed financial advisor and it's for educational purposes only. You want to do your own research. So, what you're looking at is the parking lot at my church. And many of you who are watching the video know that parking lot. That's St. John Baptist Church, Grand Prairie campus. And hopefully you can see my cursor here. I'm circling. That's my car, my Kia Soul parked there. And you can see the parking lot is empty. And this happened this week. And I am truly amazed how God will use ordinary, everyday things, just like Jesus taught, using everyday things to make a point. And in this case, you can see I'm parked on this back row because right here, you can see my cursor. That's toward the front of the church. And you see a lot of cars here. Now, you look at this and say, well, Al, there's nothing special about this, but I parked last week here one day I came in. Typically, this is where I park. And usually there's a couple of my fellow staff members' cars that are there. So that tends to guide me. So this time I came in a little bit later. And let me go back and I parked here, right? Later on, one of my staff members, fellow staff members said, I was wondering why you parked back there. I said, well, I thought something was going on because everybody was parked back here, or I didn't recognize some of the cars I thought I recognized, but there's a factory that's next to our church that also parks here. So I parked back there because I'm thinking, well, maybe there was a funeral, something I don't know about. Let me park back there. And typically, as I said, this is where I park. And so here's the teaching point. Why did I park back here? Well, I was following the crowd, a herd mentality, right? I had no evidence or any reason to park back there, but I did it because all the other cars were there. So I said, well, they must be right. So let me park right there. So what happened is a thing called herd mentality. And in the area of finances, it can lead to poor financial decisions. In fact, here's a definition. It is the tendency to follow the crowd, which frequently leads to irrational financial decisions that may not serve an individual long-term goals. Some of the drivers, the primary drivers are fear of missing out. You heard them say FOMO, or gains, fear of loss, the desire for safety, and the belief that a large group of investors must have better information. And you think about this even from financial habits that we form when we look at someone who pulls out back in the day a black, American Express gold card, a black card. Well, I must be doing something wrong because I don't have that car. And look at them, they're driving that particular car, or luxury car. Then I must be doing something wrong. You follow the crowd. Here's the market impact. Oftentimes, herding leads to asset bubbles. Remember .com back in the day with the internet, cryptocurrency, and now lately we're dealing with the AI herd mentality. Everyone piled into artificial intelligence stocks. Now everyone's piling out and now going to safer ground because they feel that, oh, AI could destroy the employment market. So herd mentality, I think, is really focusing on the flesh. We as believers and Christians, we should have a Christ-centered heart. So Romans 12 verses 1 and 2, the Message Bible says, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. And here's the emphasis area. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture, herd mentality, that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God and you'll be changed from the inside out. And by the way, this teaching, I did it as part of meeting with some brilliant seniors who are in our Bow and Dab program that we're running at the church. And this is a Christian based bows and dabs. And so we did, me and a fellow co-facilitator did a talk regarding money. And one of the things I emphasize and talk is this, not having a herd mentality when it comes to financial decisions. And also emphasizing as people, we're often good consumers. We want to move that mentality and become owners. And so I started with the basics with them. And this is good review for us also. I gave each one a financial stewardship Bible, and you know there's over 2,000 scriptures related to money and finances in that Bible. If you have that Bible, I also walked them through, and I used page numbers just to make it quicker, specific scripture that laid out how we are to have that Christian heart when it comes to finances. I started with Psalms 24:1, which is foundational, that God owns it all. Then I went to 1 Corinthians 4:2 in the New Living Translation. I really like that translation, which says we are managers and therefore we should be faithful in that management of what the owner says to do, that we saw first in Psalms 24:1. Then 2 Corinthians 9:10 talks about generosity and that the Lord will always give us the ability to be generous if we're following his will. And then Proverbs 22:7, that talks about the borrower is slave to the lender. Then I talked about Proverbs 21:20, talking about living on margin. 21:20, wise man saves for the future, but the foolish man spends everything he gets. And then finally, Luke 19:11 through 26 talks about investing, and walk them through that to show this is a Christ-centered heart mentality, or Christ-centered heart versus that herd mentality. So moving away from becoming or being consumers to looking at an ownership mentality when it comes to following God's rules. But remembering he's the owner, right? But we're looking at following his principles and having pieces of ownership in like companies or businesses, etc. And so then I took them also to this, hey, here's the ability to have stock ownership. And they readily knew those were Air Force Ones. I asked them, what company? It was Nike. Then we talked about kind of through a curveball and said, what about IKEA? Can we own that? And the answer is no, it's a private company. But one of the things I told them is watch for IPOs, initial public offerings. If IKEA ever goes public, that may be a great stock to own. Once again, not a recommendation. Then talked about Toyota Highlander. That happened to be like in the top 5 purchase vehicles for high school seniors, college freshmen. Then, of course, they knew iPhone and Samsung. And then I pointed out, hey, there's my dog, Deuce Yorkie. And I asked them, why do you think I put it there? And they were like, well, I don't know. I said, the pet industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And ask them about, hey, do you know the company Chewy? What about Petco? All of those. And then, of course, Walmart. Then Chick-fil-A, another curveball, private, and they all of them knew it was privately owned. I said, who knows, maybe one day they would do an initial public offering and become a public company. So the idea was to get them thinking about how to be, be God's owner of those things. But remember, he's the owner ultimately, but having pieces of ownership in that companies versus just buying, purchasing, being a consumer. Then pointed out something that happened just today. And those of you who were paying attention this weekend, what flooded the news was airstrikes by the U.S. On Iran. And I asked him, what do you think could happen? And I said, well, Iran being one of the top 5 energy producers, we'll probably see oil prices go up and therefore affect us when it comes to gas prices. And someone after the class also pointed out, hey, this is probably more military spending that's going to go on. Those particular companies like your Lockheed Martins, your Northrop Grumman, those type of companies. And then the other thing that happened this week was mortgage rates fell below 6% for the first time in 22 years and since 2022. And they immediately jumped on this. I tell you, this was a sharp, brilliant group. They said, well, that probably means people want to go out and buy homes. And we talked through a couple of, opportunities when it comes to homes. The other thing is related to debt. And they told them about being careful with debt, but student loans is a big topic. Of course, for them, that would be a topic of interest. We talked about Sally Mae. That's a publicly traded company. And then also said, did you know Discover Financial Services, not just the Discover card, but they also uh, lend to a lot of students when it comes to loans. So it was a great teaching and a good review for us. So this week, Here are the companies that were reporting the first week of March. Believe this is the last day of February that we're doing this video. We'll be going into the first week of March, and it could be the theme of consumer brands that are reporting. You got Target, Best Buy. We've got Walmart reported last week. You got also Costco. So a lot of the larger consumer retail brands are reporting. And this is how we close out. We had some sell off on Friday, but we're still in this range. I mean, I just extended that box out. We've been in this range since uh, the end of October. I mean, that is something. Look at QQQ just staying right in that range. Same thing for SPY. Now it's at its upper range versus look at QQQ. It's kind of staying in the middle and toward the bottom of its range, but SPY is that's definitely resistance. I mean, if it breaks out of that, it could be, as they say, Katie barred the door. We may be off and running again, but only God knows. So with that, that's this week's stewardship video. Again, just really enjoyed, and some of you may have students in that Bows and Debs. I will tell you, brilliant questions, sharp group. Pretty much all of them know what colleges they're going to. Some of them got multiple offers. Just brilliant. And it was a privilege for me to do that, and humble by it. And so, as always, this is this week's stewardship video. As our pastor Denny Dwight Davis says, um, have a good week, keep a good spirit, have a yabba dabba do good time. I might have butchered that, but as we say in the stewardship video, remember Jesus is Lord. Therefore, he's the owner, but we are his faithful stewards following the principles from his owner's manual, which we always say is the word of God. See you next week.